On behalf of Presbyterian women, I'm pleased to introduce our program, The Church of Tomorrow. And we have most of us know this is a very short introduction because they're going to tell us about themselves. But all of us know Annie. But I really liked it when Taylor said, he's Mr. Annie. I think that was good. That's how our children know him. But we're just so pleased to have our Director of Christian Ed, Annie Barner, and her husband, Taylor. Taylor is going to have us take a look at what's happening with the Church of Tomorrow. How do we keep our youth engaged? And it starts from baptism on up, and we're looking at that. What is it, 18 to 40, keeping more engaged. And so we're going to learn some new things. So Annie and Taylor, welcome, and we're so glad you're going to share all your knowledge with us. Thank you.
So Mr. Annie was actually what the kids at Vacation Bible School dubbed Taylor. I really like that it stuck around. It's pretty great. We'll see what the slideshow does. Yeah. So we wanted to start, you guys know who we are, but we wanted to just take a little bit of time to explain some of our experience both in the church and particularly for me working with children. These are some throwback pictures. I haven't changed very much, but you can kind of look right here. This is me in middle school and then high school and then college. Through my time, just like growing up in the church and whatnot, my leadership was with kids starting when I was in high school. I worked with middle schoolers mostly, and then when I got into college, I worked with some high schoolers. I worked at a day camp with preschoolers, which was a lot of fun. Kind of have been through the ages from nursery age through graduated seniors. When I was in college, I was really involved in my campus ministry. And then I took some time. I taught for 6 years in an elementary school, which was a lot of fun. And let me look at my notes here. I continued working with children as a classroom teacher before I found myself here at WPC. And many of my experiences growing up in the church and working with children have shaped the way I do ministry here. And we just want to preface our presentation by saying that we are certainly not experts by any realm of the possibility, but tonight's presentation is based on a lot of the things that we have seen and learned over the years and the interactions that we've had with young children and older children and all those in between.
So I had a little bit of a different experience. I grew up in the church, just as Annie did, but I didn't have the summer camp experience, if you will. It wasn't until later, and that's how Annie and I actually met, through Massanetta Springs Middle School Conference and Montreat High School Conference, that I got to understand why those conferences were so pivotal for Annie growing up. But I actually grew up helping out with our Sunday services as a liturgist as a youth, participating in mission trips and fall retreats and winter retreats and all that good stuff that comes with youth group. When I went off to college, I attended a small Christian college north of Pittsburgh, about an hour. And it was there that I really got involved with a couple different organizations. And being at a Christian college, your faith is pretty much tied into everything that you do. And somehow I found myself to also end up being the chaplain for the volleyball team. You get thrust into roles sometimes, and but it was during that time that I felt a calling to ministry. In particular, I had a passion for youth ministry because that was what had been so pivotal for me up until that point in time, that I wanted others to have that experience as well. And so you've got some pictures up here from my previous call. This is my group, my second year that I was in Burlington, North Carolina, and some of these kids this is the same kid, his senior year, as this was his 8th grade year of school there. And so it was just cool to see the progression of students over the course of their lives as they're figuring out who they are and figuring out their stories and also diving deeper into their relationship with God. That was my passion. So I really loved doing that. But one of the parts of my job at Burlington was also doing work with our UKirk organization at Elon University. If you're not familiar with UKirk, UKirk means University Kirk, and Kirk is the Scottish word for church. It is our national collegiate Presbyterian campus ministry organization. And so I got involved with that because it was part of the nature of my job, but I had done some work in campus ministry before that. But 3 years ago, really, an opportunity presented itself to work with Jacob's Porch at Ohio State as their Presbyterian campus minister. And so I now work there with my Lutheran, Methodist, and Episcopalian counterparts doing ministry together as an ecumenical group. And so campus ministry is where my love for the developmental stages of Christian faith and spirituality starts to then become a little bit more personal as college students take it upon themselves to really define what it is that they believe. And I love that stage of faith development. Heroes. Good.
All right, so we wanted to start with a question tonight. This is a little bit of a teacher move here. But we would like for you guys at your tables to just take a couple of minutes to turn and talk with each other. First of all, raise your hand if you grew up like with a church community, maybe at a young age. Wow, okay, that was way more than I thought it was going to be, but I love that. So we want you guys to share this question. If you grew up in a church community, what is an experience that sticks out in your mind? And then I want you to reflect on why do you think that experience was so memorable. You guys can turn and talk. I don't want to cut off the good conversation. Hopefully we'll have some time in a little bit to continue sharing. Even if you didn't have time to share, maybe you have that experience in your mind. I'm curious, and I actually am glad this worked. I heard it from a couple of people. As you think of that experience or as you shared, did anyone have a specific person or people that stood out in that church memory? You can just raise your hand. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling, a lot of hands. So that's kind of going to be one of our points tonight as we talk about this stuff.
So before we get into what we can be doing to embrace the future of the church, let's talk about some data and demographics. And we want to also define who it is that we're really trying to discuss and reach out to. And so you probably have heard these terms thrown around a couple different times. If you were at the talk that I gave previously about Jacob's Porch, you might recognize this slide. It's the same exact one. But we want to talk about Gen Z and Gen Alpha because that is who we're talking about when we're thinking about students, particularly from the ages of middle school currently, all the way through college and into young adulthood. You might also touch on like older millennials in your young adult kind of range, especially if we're going up to 40. I myself am a millennial. Annie's millennial, Gen Z, you're like right on the cusp. But if we're thinking about the future of the church, if we're thinking about children, we're really talking about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And these are just a few kind of overarching themes that we've noticed amongst not just our college students at Jacob's Porch, but some research that a fellow colleague of mine, Brittany Porch, and I did some research on this to present at the Association of Partners in Christian Education conference in Pittsburgh back in January. And one of the things that stands out amongst all elders is that Gen Z and Gen Alpha crave authenticity, but they aren't exactly creators of community, so to speak. They crave authentic relationships, but they don't exactly always know where to go to create such kinds of forms of community or how to build those types of relationships. They seek a belonging and purpose, But a lot of times they find that around shared interests and hobbies rather than, say, communal structures, building their communities around those kind of shared interests. One of the other things that these two generations have a unique marker in particular is also loneliness and anxiety. They experience these two things in particular at a heightened rate as opposed to other generations. A lot of this is attributed to a couple different factors, whether it's a more plugged in culture and society that we are, and the sharing of news and information that comes through social media for them. Some of it is residual from COVID and the experience of going online fully and not knowing how to build relationships, or not really having leaders that have gone ahead of them to model what it looks like to be builders and shapers of their communities. I saw this in particular with my students down in North Carolina. During COVID, prior to COVID, we had a youth group about the size of 35 or 40 that went on a mission trip to Belize. That was my first year there. And the next year, we had roughly about the same go on a more domestic mission trip. And those were friends. Those weren't all members of the church. In fact, actually, only 10 of the students that were connected to the church comprised that group of 35 that went to Belize. And it was all of their friends that they had invited to come and be part of the community. The group after them stepped right into those shoes and started doing the same thing. COVID changed a few things for that. In particular, I'm not going to put everything on COVID. There's other factors that certainly go into this. But we saw over the next 2 years, we saw students seek out other spaces, other things, because everything had been taken away. And as they started to come back out into the world, they sought different circles more primarily than the church. And yet we still had a younger generation, the younger classes that remembered what it was like prior to COVID, but they didn't have anybody modeling what it looked like to build and shape the community and invite people into it. They felt that they were too young to do that themselves. And it was actually when I took the call up here at Jacob's Porch that we started to notice a desire from our ninth graders, where they didn't have anybody leading from the upperclassmen. They said, we're going to do it ourselves. They started a coffee club. They started a board game club. They started an after-school hangout group. And these are all things that they wanted because nobody else was doing it. And so they crave these things, and yet they also simultaneously feel a little trapped in not feeling adequately prepared or equipped to build these structures for themselves. And that's why go back one more. Digital spaces have become an incredible third place for these generations. A lot of times communities will form online before they even form in person sometimes. Now on college campuses, we see this more so happening in person and then also having an online presence. But there are some groups on campus that operate primarily in a digital space rather than a physical space. And that is still community to them. And this last part, I think, is the most important. They are more likely to show up if they're invited into, if they invite us into their world, not us inviting them into our world. So whether that's a special interest or whether that's friends and family members, they feel way more comfortable inviting us into their world rather than stepping into something new for themselves that maybe doesn't necessarily touch on any of their particular interests or circles. And so it is important to talk a little bit about the data. This is data that we pulled from 2 different Pew Research studies, one from 2024, one from 2025. So some things may have shifted and changed slightly, but this number in particular has actually stayed the same. 28% of U.S. adults are now religiously unaffiliated. We've heard this referred to as the nuns or the lost, if you will, generation or body of Americans. But that number 28% has actually stayed true through 2026 as well. Most people are not in these generations, Gen Alpha and Gen Zs particularly, are not hostile to religion. I think there's kind of an assumption that they don't like the church. It's more so they're just disinterested. It is not at the top of their priority list to be involved in a religious or spiritual community. Many of them do still pray, meditate, and find meaning in spirituality in different forms, but they don't participate in a community on a regular, weekly, monthly basis, if you will. It's more solitary, it's more individual. And I love this. This is something Brittany added in just because we didn't know how to say it, but they like Jesus, but they just don't get some of the things that they see the church doing, the church big C, not just the Presbyterian church, but seeing things in the media and online about ways in which the church isn't embodying the ministry of Jesus Christ, at least in their understanding of it. Shifting a little bit, the other research that we looked at dealt with church decline, particularly within mainline Protestantism, and seeing actually that decline has slowed. I think there's a general fear that I've heard all throughout my 10 years of experience now, where there's a fear that the church is dying. The church is not dying. I want to present hope and optimism here. This is not pessimism. We are still in decline, technically, but that decline has started to even out. About a couple of years ago, there was a report that came out that said the Presbyterian Church USA is one of the fastest declining denominations. What we've actually started to see is a return of young folks, actually, particularly white men, young white men, returning to the church. That's the demographic that has grown in the last couple of years. And so we're seeing shifting changes in demographics and trends start to emerge that whereas there used to be a general sense of decline as people stepped away from mainline Protestantism. What this means for us and why this is hopeful is that we have an opportunity to innovate. We have an opportunity to try something new, and we have to because as the new generation comes into view, they need vastly different things than what has worked for the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, so that kind of leads into like thinking about our kids here at our church. One of our pictures isn't showing up there. But a big idea that building relationships with our children is far more important than the programming that we're pumping out here. Especially if that programming hasn't changed for 10 plus years. There is such an emphasis sometimes on like we have to do this because this is the way we've always done it, but that's not necessarily the case. We can have great curriculums, fun events, we can have as much energy as we need, but if a child does not feel known or loved by real adults, they are far less likely to stay rooted in church long term. Programs attract, but relationships anchor. Our intentionality with children and youth matters. I love this. Identity is formed through attachment. And so these are some things that kids subconsciously ask themselves, whether they realize it or not. When they come to church, they might say in their head, who sees me? Who cares if I'm here? And who would notice if I disappeared? If the answer is no one, disengagement follows. But if the answer is a lot of people, their roots start to grow deep. So a couple of points to this. Children love routines. If you have kids or have ever worked with kids, this is so true. The more familiar they are with what we do at church, the safer they will feel. I put a picture of our sanctuary there because I know at least our children here love running around in it, which is a great problem to have because they feel familiar with it, they feel safe with it, and that's a great thing. The same thing goes for people. The more people in a church know our kids, including Doesn't matter how old you are, the safer those kids will feel. So one question I had, just a little food for thought, was, when was the last time you sat down with a family at church? Whether it was you changed where you sat upstairs in our sanctuary, which I know that's hard, or when was the last time you changed where you sat at TNT and sat with a family and talked to not just the parents, but the kids too. Children like to be known, and that's kind of some of the ways that we can help them feel safe and loved here at church.
So let's take some practical steps. What are some things that we can be doing to meet the changing needs, the ever-changing needs of these younger generations? So I've got 4 different examples. These are not exhaustive by any means, but the first one is probably the most uncomfortable for some of us. We have to leave the walls of this building. We have to step outside of our community that we have here and find out what that community, particularly our youngest members of that community, are doing elsewhere. This means showing up where young people already gather and being not just showing up, but making a point of being visible to them in their spaces. This includes sporting events, school concerts and plays, festivals within the neighborhood, or community events, widespread community events. Coffee shops are another big one, as well as some parks on there. Some groups we found gather in outdoor spaces as part of that kind of spirituality component. These are places where our young people already are. And I think one of the most moving examples of this is when I first started down in Burlington. Obviously, I hadn't met Annie yet, and I didn't have a whole lot to do in my evening time. So pretty much every night of the week, I was actually going out to our youth sporting events or plays. We had a lot of actors as well, and making a point. There was never a time though that I left before saying hi to the student. And it wasn't just me that was doing this. We also had a group of about 15 to 20 different youth advisors that were other adults from the church. And I think this is, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, this is something you guys already do here too, where they took it upon themselves to, in their personal free time, go out and do this work of ministry, meeting young people where they already were. And the impact that had was really evident in terms of seeing who showed up the next Sunday. And not just who showed up, but who also brought friends. And who also, the next time we saw them out and about, whether it was at another sporting event or some other place, saying, hey, I want you to meet my friend, and I want to invite them to youth group on Sunday night. It was just as simple as showing up. That's all it was. And a lot of times we think that this is only for our pastors or our youth directors or our church staff or those who volunteer specifically to do the work of youth ministry to do this. No. Anybody that a student connects with, oh, that's somebody that goes to the church. And they took the time to be here where I am, the thing that I'm doing. Wow. That really leaves a lasting impression. I think I added this just because I think this is really important. I think that there's a lot of ideas that we go to these things so that students come back. When really the hope is to, like as Annie said, build relationships and hope that it's a simultaneous desire to get to know one another better in the long run. It's not just about going out and catching as many people as we can in the net and bringing them back to the church. It's showing them that we care enough to want them to develop a relationship with the church. The other part of this first part that I thought we should just make a second bullet point is also partnering with existing third spaces. Who's familiar with what a third space is? Or what the first and second spaces are? Okay. The first space is home. The second space is work or school. And so what is the third space? The third space can be anything. It can be church. Yes, is a great one. And it used to be that churches were a third space, were the third space. I can remember growing up, I spent probably 4 days a week at my church for various different things that were not church related, because churches were centers of community. And over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, we've seen a shift in that, where stuff still happens here. We are still gathering here for various different mission projects and community organizations. Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts still meet in our spaces. AA groups, NA groups still meet here. Community resource centers are housed in our church buildings. And yet, communities have started to form in other types of third spaces. Some of them around sports. Other things are around shared topics of interest, the book clubs, things like that. So what are these other third spaces, and how might we, rather than recreating the wheel, might we partner with these other existing places and say, not for the purpose of like leeching off of them, but saying, hey, we recognize that these other communal spaces might be beneficial to us, and we would like to partner with you. And community centers, public libraries, local cafes, all of these things are different ways that the church can say, hey, let's go be the church outside of the spaces that we're expected to exist in. You go to the next one. This third one is kind of very similar to the last part of the first one, is being present without hijacking. It's listening to what is already happening in the lives of our young people and building relationships before suggesting faith-based partnerships. In addition to not wanting to just recruit people to come back to the church, we don't want to view faith necessarily into everything that we do with our young people. I think a great example of this is that sometimes we would just have game nights, nights where we would play games at youth. And there was this expectation from some of my students that, oh, well, we're going to play a game for the first 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to go sit and talk for 30 minutes, and it'll be that part's really boring, but the first 20 minutes is fine. There were some nights where we showed up, and the students were like, are we not going to talk tonight? And we're like, let's just hang out, let's play games, like let's just be together. And that was mind-boggling for some of them, because they had grown up in this system where this is how a youth group was. It was regimented, it had kind of the structure, but rather than breaking the routine entirely, we just modify the structure of what we do sometimes. And the same thing goes for more extracurricular type activities. You can lead a church. One of the things that I just got invited to it on Facebook recently was the PCUSA board game group. This is a group of pastors that noticed that there was a shared desire for tabletop gaming, and they created a Facebook group, and I got invited to it. And everyone immediately was like, who wants to play this? And we're like, okay, there's like a bajillion games out there to play. It's a little hard to get people onto the same page in that respect, but finding the shared interest amongst your local young people, whether that's gaming, whether that's book clubs like in the library, or whether that's more missional focus kind of stuff, outreach in the local community that isn't necessarily already something that the church is connected to and doing. These are all different ways that we can be present in the things that they're passionate about without hijacking it for the purposes of the church, or saying that there has to be some kind of scriptural faith-based component to every little thing that we do. And that sometimes rubs people the wrong way, in the idea that being part of a community also says that we want to be involved in the things that community is doing as well. But there's a time and a place for extending that invitation after we attempt to build relationships first. It's not just a give and a take, it's give and give, and when the time comes, invite them into our spaces as well. And I think this last one is probably the most important to me. I think lifting up youth voices is critical to the work of the church. when we get to that point of inviting them into our space, we want to make sure that they're not just part of it and we don't talk to them ever again. We want to hear what they have to say and take what they are thinking and turn that into productivity and reality in our congregations, because they've now joined their voices with ours, or they've grown up in our churches, yes, and we want to make sure that we're elevating their voices as well. And this is not to elevate their voices. There's not a give and take here. We don't need to diminish the voices of others in our midst to elevate the voices of young people. I think one of the ways that a lot of people see this done is through leadership in church services, inviting them to be liturgists or part of the choir. Yes, those are good things. But even being bolder to say, we need youth representation on our sessions. We need to identify young people, not just young adults, but young kids even, that have a passion for church and doing the work of polity and governing the church as well. And sometimes in the church that I was at in North Carolina, we did this a little differently, where we had youth representatives session. I was a little mad about it because the kids did all the elder training that the actual elders did, but they weren't ordained. I had a lot of problems with that, but that's a story for another time. But we had a representative from 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade each year. And they stayed on as long as they could. Sometimes they had to rotate off because of school and sports and work and other things. But they weren't bound to the same structure as elders are in terms of like 3-year terms. And they made a point of having one of them at least present. They rotated on a monthly basis at the session meetings. And they provided a report on what the youth group was doing, what was coming up, what things they needed for the church. And sometimes their voices were heard, sometimes their voices weren't heard. But nonetheless, they had a seat at the table. And it's these kinds of ideas where we can provide a space that says to young people, we want to hear what you have to say. Not every young person is going to want to step into that. They are diverse, they are very different, they have different personalities, and some will step boldly into that open space, but others will not. And it's making sure that we're not pushing or pulling people into these roles that don't want to be in them. But when they do step up, making sure that we're listening when the opportunity presents itself. Yes, sorry, I'm talking too sweet.
So kind of circling back to like our big question tonight and building on what Taylor just talked about, is how can we keep kids beyond their high school years and beyond building relationships. Participating in real church life is crucial to keep kids engaged. There's this idea of separate church, and that's the idea like if kids are hushed away to only learn about God elsewhere, maybe elsewhere in the church, elsewhere in the community, they're not going to transition well into the full body of the church later on in life. Meaning sometimes we don't mean to do this, but it happens. Sometimes we shut kids out without realizing it. Kids might unintentionally absorb the message that church isn't something for me right now, but someday I'll be able to go to it. So if we ask kids to participate in worship, what would it be like to stand up front and not feel like anyone out there in the congregation cares about you, or that you're just doing it because your parents made you? Kids need the time and space to learn how to worship, and visibility communicates value to kids. The more they see themselves and their peers as a part of our worship space, the more they will feel valued and committed to church as well. When kids feel like they belong and are valued, they will be more committed to being involved. Kind of what I just said, belonging drives commitment. And Taylor kind of just hit on this, but we need to ask ourselves, what roles can children and youth take on so they can say that this isn't just the church my family goes to, but this is my church? Can they be greeters at our front door on Sunday mornings? Could they help ushers? Could an usher hold their hand and help them collect the offering? Could they be representatives on the session? Can our older youth also be Sunday school teachers themselves? I would argue that children can do just as important things as adults can do in a church. And I speak that from my personal experience. I know my brother and I were very involved on our session when we were high school age, and that was just amazing that we had that opportunity. When we're thinking about that big question, though, of how can we keep kids beyond their high school years, I want to leave you guys with one big thought, and I'm going to say this twice. If our young people never feel necessary to the church, they will not feel missed when they leave it. If our young people never feel necessary to the church, they will not feel missed when they leave it. So we wanted to take some time and see if you guys had any questions for us. Oh, wait, I forgot. There's one question for you first. We're going to take just one more, like a couple minutes at our tables, just to share, turn and talk with your table mates. But what is something that you heard or learned tonight that maybe surprised you, encouraged you, or that you feel like you might be able to act on yourself, whether it's here or just in our community? You guys can turn and talk for a minute. Not to cut you guys off, but we do want to make sure we leave some time for questions. I'll share a really quick story. Taylor, I don't know if you'll be embarrassed by this, but Taylor's first night of youth ministry at our old church, she asked the youth, do any of you have any questions? And, there's always that one kid in the youth group. He raised his hand and he said, Taylor, what's your social security number? So please don't ask us that question.
We told them that I had to answer, but.
Are there any questions that pertain to our program tonight?
Yeah, I'll walk around.
I can talk, Paul.
Okay, well.
So Taylor, just for you, what do you call your meetings at Ohio State? Because I know here, and I've heard this from kids, the term youth group sends them the other way. A lot of times youth group is automatically.
Yeah, here, say that.
So what term are you using on the university campuses for your meetings? I know that most churches use youth group, and that sends a lot of kids the other way because, first of all, they're thinking it's church, and they don't want to do it. It's a church on Sunday night or taking up their time. So what term do you use to make it not sound like, because all the things you're talking about, they're trying to make it not so church, like they're being force-fed that. So is there a term that you?
Yeah, and so to clarify, we don't want to eliminate that the church is who we are. One of the things, like, for example, that we do on campus is the Orange Couch, and we get students that ask us, is this a church? And we say, yes, we are a church. And sometimes that does send a lot of young people who are disillusioned with the church kind of running the other direction. We don't call it youth group. We refer to ourselves as a campus ministry group at the collegiate level. And our discussion, we have a Wednesday night discussion group is what we refer to it as. It's called The Thing, because we're not very creative in campus ministry. It was really because our students started asking, what time is The Thing on Wednesday night? And like I said, we're not creative. But Sunday nights, we just refer to Sunday night as worship. We have dinner and worship on Sunday nights. And other than that, other groups, other campus ministries, some of which you may be familiar with, they hold Bible studies. They hold there's men's and women's groups. There's queer allied groups that meet for Bible studies as well. And so a lot of times at the collegiate level, you're hearing more specific language that is church related as opposed to non-church language. And a lot of times if you're not hearing that language, there tends to be a little bit more subversion from some groups as to like, hey, we're not like your typical church. Like we're not, and even our tagline on the outside of our building is a church, period, kinda. And that's because a lot of campus ministries too, they are self-aware enough to say, we're not a church. We are a ministry here on campus. We would love to help you get plugged into a church community. These are communities themselves, and yet the language does shift at the collegiate level away from youth group, the young adult group, older adult education groups, those kind of classifications that Annie would probably separate in terms of the groups that she's connected with. But at the collegiate level, we're just campus ministries. And that's how we probably refer to ourselves as. So, good question. Other questions?
So a big conversation in the church right now, as I'm sure you're aware, is about metrics. How do we measure what, quote, success looks like in ministry, with the traditional metrics being, attendance, budget, the quantifiable numbers. But you're talking about ministry that isn't necessarily about how many kids came to youth group. You're talking about building relationships in spaces where the expectation isn't, we're going to be able to count you when you come in the door for youth group. And so what to you are some metrics for saying this is ministry that is fruitful, and how do you track that?
I just want to share a story that I hope this answers your question, but I had a church member, I wish she was here tonight, but she's not, email me last summer, and I think this is a metric that some of our children's programming is working to build those relationships. You might know this church member. She was at a school giving a presentation about some of the books she has written in front of, I don't know, a couple hundred of third, fourth, fifth graders. Yeah, who might that be? And amidst all of these children, as she's talking about books, this kid way in the back starts jumping up and down when it was question time. Miss Haddix, I remember you from BBS. You were my leader. And in front of all of his peers, he jumped up and said he wanted them to know that he had that relationship with her. And I think that right there is how you measure it. You can't put it on a number on that. So
I would absolutely echo that. I think the strength of the relationships marks for us better than numbers do. Especially in campus ministry, there's so many groups that people see as thriving because they have massive numbers coming out for their programs. This is everything, and I'm not naming different groups on campus, but you have some groups that when you think of campus ministry are immediate go-to groups that you think of. And simply the knowledge that the UKIRP network exists is one for me. If I go to a church and they're like, oh yeah, we sent, or we have so-and-so going off to school here, we got them plugged into the campus ministry that's already going on over at OU. Or this year we had 7 students go to Bowling Green, and I had 3 different pastors call me and be like, hey, I saw that there's not any campus ministry for Presbyterian students at Bowling Green. Who can I send them to? The fact that we have people that are asking those questions, whether they're pastors or lay people or parents, that to me is a metric of success in campus ministry. Whether or not that student makes the commitment to go, that's on them. College is that time where they have to take that leap themselves, and we can't continue to just push them into doing it. But admittedly, we do want to focus on numbers to some extent, but it's not just about who's showing up per week. It's not like keeping an attendance sheet. It's the consistency of which we also then hold on and continue to nurture those relationships. So at the porch, we have every week, as part of our staff meeting, we're saying, hey, have we reached out to so-and-so within the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month? And making sure that we get lunch with that student, or that we're giving them at least a text message to say, hey, we're just checking in, making sure that things are okay. That to me is a metric of success rather than but it's still numbers based. So I think I'm talking too much. I do this. I'm sorry. Yes.
Just want to thank you for it. Okay. Just hold it close to your mouth. Okay. Just want to thank you for really a creative presentation. I don't want to sound like a college teacher, but it's the best one I heard in many years. Thank you. By listening to you, I found out that, you said something very important. In the sine curve of life, you met many expectations. And you follow the curve from the very beginning all the way up and down. And we all have to experience that. But what I really like about your effect, at least for me, was that you have a creative spirit, a real symbiosis. It's like a creative fit. And you took that energy and translated that into another form of education for young people. I also sense that you tried to say that, the family is still the origin of whether you go to church or not. But sometimes in life, things happen tragic, and the family is not there. The church becomes a family, right? And it can happen. And so I think you did this beautifully. So keep it up, and all power to you.
And I can definitely say, per your example, I would say about 40% of the students that come to Jacob's Porch are atheist and agnostic. That means that their parents, whether they are churched or not the ones that are encouraging them necessarily to come to church. And yet the church has become their family, even if they're still not totally on board with everything. So.
Dwayne has a question. Are we surprised?
I do, Taylor.
We need clarification, Taylor. You reference Jacob's Porch.
Yes.
You reference OSU Kirk. Now, I'm thinking that there's a lot of people in this room that may not quite understand that relationship. I didn't there.
Yeah, my goal is not to focus on what we're doing at Jacob's Porch specifically. We're talking from our experiences. I did use two terms tonight that are not necessarily interchangeable. Jacob's Porch is the ecumenical campus ministry that has existed at OSU under the Lutheran auspice of the Lutheran Church, and we now are part of that from the Presbyterian Church as well. But OSU Kirk is our Presbyterian board that is centered and housed at the presbytery level here in Scioto Valley, and is made up of ministers and lay people from different churches throughout the presbytery that seeks to meet the needs of our Presbyterian students on campus as well. OSU Kirk is also the one that is currently engaged in the capital campaign that you may have heard about from the presbytery about establishing permanent Presbyterian campus ministry at OSU. So it's important to delineate the two, but tonight was not the focus of doing that. But I did use both terms. Apologies. Any other final questions? One more. So I know we got to go.
I'll make it quick. This is all about the responsibility of giving money to the church. My kids came here for preschool, had fabulous teachers, and really believe they were invited to their weddings and things like that. So long term. However, and my kids then sent their kids here or to a Presbyterian church. And then the hit came for money. They can understand paying for the kids' preschool, but they have a hard time doing that, and that's measurable, as you know. How do you build inside of them that it's important to give not only their time, but their money?
Do you have any thoughts? Because I've got some, but I talk too much.
I would say I think those are just important lessons that we teach them not only in Sunday school, but through our action in worship. And I mean, you guys know how mission focused our church is. Those things. Yeah. Not to cut anyone off, but we do have just one quote we want to share tonight, and you guys are gonna laugh at this, but this is kind of like a rule that I grew up with, and I think Taylor's kind of taken on at the various camps that I've worked at and went to, but just kind of something we want to leave you guys with. But don't be a last year kid. And we said this a lot in our youth group in Burlington, but what that means is, I hear this a lot. Sometimes we are so focused on, well, last year we did it this way on Palm Sunday, or for Christmas 5 years ago, we started this tradition and we still need to do it today. And we just kind of want to drive home the point that our kids are different today than we were when we were kids, and the things we were doing 15, 20 years ago is not what we should be doing today, because our kids are different.
It's a new year. And I think a lot of times we want to look back at the times that we had success, and we want to keep doing the things that were successful without recognizing that there are new opportunities, there are new things that God is doing in our midst. And we might be closing ourselves off to what new thing Jesus is doing. And I think that that's the language that we have to embody. We have to embody that mentality of looking and seeing what God is doing in the world and asking how we can be a part of that, not just on a yearly basis, but on a monthly basis, on a daily basis. Checking ourselves and saying, in what ways might we need to shift and change? What ways might we need to be uncomfortable, rather than just settling back into the comfortability of last year? So thank y'all. Appreciate the opportunity.